Welcome to Asian American Parenting, a podcast from Rooted Ministry and the Sola Network, where the gospel meets Asian American faith, culture, and parenting. Each episode, we explore how to raise the next generation with a strong gospel foundation in Christ while navigating the unique challenges of our cultural identity. Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in. Welcome to Asian American Parenting, the podcast of the Rooted Ministry and the Sola Network, where Asian American parenting, faith, and culture meet together. Today, we're talking about dating and Asian American teenagers with my co-host, Monica Kim.
Hi, everyone.
Monica is a biblical counselor and psychologist, and she's on the editorial board of the Sola Network. And I am a former youth pastor for 29 years at one church, and now I serve at the Rooted Ministry. So, considering this topic, I'm really excited to talk to you about it, Monica, today. Dating and Asian American teenagers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all of that also within a Christian understanding of it too. I think our first question that it would be good for us to talk a little bit about is what um, are our views of dating, or what were our views of dating growing up as Asian American teenagers? In some sense, what was your experience like growing
Yeah,
up as
yeah,
an Asian American teen?
yeah. I'm sure, like a lot of Asian American who are old like me now, who were once teenagers in America, our parents were not as fluent in English, did not communicate with us, so there was no real talk of
Mm-hmm.
dating as much with our parents. And, some of that education on dating came from what we got at church. And sometimes that view of in church was don't date, no dating. And that's how we were educated, and our views of dating, we were taught.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was your experience uh, of dating growing up as Asian American teen. I know mine was similar to you too, in that more than the church saying this, my parents forbade me from dating. So
Okay.
that was my dad in particular. He was more of the kind of um, the disciplinarian or the teacher in the kind of the family context, and he said, "There's no dating."
Yeah.
Uh, and so we didn't have any conversations about dating. So I looked at it, my experience of it, even though my father was a pastor and grew up in a Christian context, that I saw it not mostly as a Christian perspective, but like an Asian perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a little bit of all of a mix. Similarly, like you, though, my parents didn't really talk about it.
Yeah.
And with us, I just knew that they forbade it. And then suddenly, though, once I, got into college, it was another kind of, so when are you going to look for a partner for marriage? It was just a real kind of an interesting dynamic culturally
Yeah.
for me. Um, I just wanted to add one more point, is that while I was growing up, though, while trying to navigate through I think the Asian context or culture of understanding dating, but also the Christian understanding of dating, that was hard to kind of understand altogether.
Yeah.
Then there was the peer influence in terms of the understanding of dating.
Yeah.
I think my peers, because the peers that I had were very multi-ethnic, and so they came in with so many kinds of views on dating or talking about liking somebody, and so my peers were the ones who would talk to me about um, talking about liking, someone in the school
Yeah.
and getting excited about talking about it. It was so normalized.
Yeah.
That's how I became more introduced into the idea of, oh, okay, others are dating, others
Yeah.
are liking each other. I'm not allowed. So
Yeah.
that's just a little bit of I guess, um, a an experience that I reflect on that may have shaped my perspective or my understanding of dating.
So, speaking of peer influence, now that we are parents of Asian American teenagers and we can actually communicate with our teenagers in the same language, uh, how can we as parents generally approach the idea of dating with our teenager?
Hmm. Yeah, I imagine, mind you, when um, I'm thinking about our kids now, they are not teenagers, and so these are experiences and perspectives, especially as our children were growing up and they were teens, what we may have really thought about, reflecting on our past, but also trying to be thoughtful about what does it mean to be an Asian American with the experiences we've had, but also within a Christian context with our kids. How can we now uh, um, approach this issue of dating? I think one of the things that we really thought was important was being able to start talking to our children
Hmm.
at an appropriate age, not just about dating, but in terms about liking someone, normalizing these feelings of having a crush and being able to let them know that we can talk about it and encourage them that it's okay.
Yeah.
So I do think one of the things that as Christian parents approaching this issue of dating, what's important is to be able to open those lines of communication, normalizing the understanding, normalizing the talk on uh, dating and having relationships.
Yeah. And I remember one time our youngest child, around ninth or 10th grade, he started asking for rides to go to Starbucks out of the blue. And then we realized that he is going to meet a girl.
Hmm.
And one of the beautiful things I thought in that time is that one of the times you were driving him to Starbucks and you kind of sensed that he was going to date, you had a conversation with him about how he's to treat women
Hmm.
with respect and dignity. And I thought that was a real beautiful thing about opening up that conversation with him. And
Hmm.
because, we can speak the same language together.
Yeah, yeah. I think just hopping on to your point about that is that even if we as parents open up communication and reflection on the topic of dating with our teens, it doesn't necessarily mean that they will be they will hop onto that, train and say they want to talk all about it.
Yeah,
And in fact, they still might not want to talk about it, which is actually a normal thing for a
yeah,
teen to do, is still not want to talk about it. And there are going to be just a variation of responses from our teenagers because that is also at an age when they're starting to grow more comfortable being open to their peers.
yeah,
Uh, and so our teenage son didn't openly share it, but he also didn't hide it in that he made it pretty obvious that he was
yeah,
dating or going out to see somebody.
yeah,
And it opened up an avenue for us to talk about how um, he could take care of being thoughtful and respectful in the
yeah.
midst of that date.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think just generally speaking, just being open with communication and being able to just open the lines of communications on a topic like
Mhm.
dating is kind of just important for, even if they don't want to talk back to you, converse with
Mhm.
you, that it's important to just open up the conversation with your teenager.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 Um, Go
On that
ahead. Yeah,
yeah, on that note, in terms of, talking about, dating or opening up lines of communication about dating with our, uh, teens, uh, uh, does our faith impact our views of dating and marriage for our teenagers,
yeah,
and how might you talk about it with them?
yeah. So I want to talking about faith and
Mhm.
dating across racial lines, because I was a youth pastor at a still old school immigrant Asian church where the parents still told their kids, marry a Chinese person because you're Chinese, or marry a Korean person because you're Korean. But now, you and I are second and third generation parents, and how do we feel about race and faith? And so, when it comes to faith, faith in dating, I do think about verses like 2 Corinthians 6:14, do not be yoked together with unbelievers. And I've always told my teenagers, make sure you marry a Christian. But, you know, the reality is, if they bring home a girl that's not a Christian, do we cut off communication? Do we stop talking to them? And I remember as a longtime youth pastor, um, there was these two former students, both females, and one dated a Christian who was an African American. This was in my Korean church where I was the youth pastor 29 years. She was about to marry him. And the other girl, Korean girl, was dating a Chinese American who was a non Christian. And I told my youth group of 200 kids, go home and ask your parents, what is better, to marry a Christian who is African American or a non Christian who is Chinese American? And all 200 youth group kids went home and asked their parents. And I got so many phone calls that week of angry parents. They were upset at me. And, it had to do with, race and, and what
And
I
less
was,
about faith.
less about faith. And, you know, I think when it comes to, my parents were never like, marry a Korean because I was Korean. Um, but I always said faith is most important. Um, I try to really also, though, really want to love my child unconditionally. And whatever race or faith that they bring home as a partner, I want
Mhm.
to get to know them and have a relationship with the person that they're dating.
Mhm. Yeah. Uh, Added to that, I don't know if you wanted to make it more clear that the parents were, more angry about the question because, they wanted their kids to marry similar racial, folks versus so they rather have, their children marry similar races rather than someone who is really different racially, even though they're Christian,
Yeah,
and that was really unfortunate,
I will, I
to hear
will,
about that.
I will say that most parents the kids told me, the youth group told me, all 200 kids, most of them said the parents were saying Chinese who's non-Christian versus African American Christian, and it was just kind of
Yeah.
sad.
It was, yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And so I think personally, I think those kinds of experiences brought to light again uh, the call of how do we really subsume all of those personal biases and experiences on this side of heaven under the call of love God, love neighbor.
yeah,
And I think we have had to really think deeply about that within also an Asian American context where not only, had we talked about being Asian Americans in church, having experienced marginalized kind of experiences, but also uh, uh, being racist too.
yeah,
And so that's something so important
yeah,
for all of us to be thoughtful about. And how do we continue to thoughtfully share and have discussions with our teens
yeah,
concerning what it means to really love God, love neighbor in the midst of all of these kinds of influences and biases and discriminatory perspectives, in group, out group, type of all these points, and really think about how do we teach our children in the context of relationships, close relationships, romantic relationships, in dating, to love God and love neighbor. And having said that, just going back to what's important then to myself with my kids, I think we often have shared with them that what is really important is how does our love for God, our faith in their personal hearts really inform them of how they can treat their dating relationships and their partners, uh, even if they might be um, exploring Christianity of a different race, or are, if they're Christians and are they're of the same race.
yeah,
So just important to help them to think thoughtfully in light of loving God and loving neighbor in that context is something that we have tried to continue to encourage with our children.
yeah. And how important do you think in that light, Monica, is it important that Christian parents talk to their children and teenagers, especially about um, how faith impacts our dating and to marry a Christian? Because as a pastor, you know, s- marrying, doing a wedding of a Christian and non-Christian,
Hmm.
um, some pastors are okay with doing those weddings. A lot of my pastors' friends won't do weddings of a Christian and non-Christian
Hmm.
because of their pastoral convictions, and 2 Corinthians 6:14, do
Hmm.
not be yoked with unbelievers. But how might we think about and approach talking about faith and dating and marriage to our teenagers, about marrying a Christian and
Hmm.
and not being yoked with unbelievers without being legalistic and beating it over the head. But I always try to tell our kids, only thing that I care about is marrying a Christian,
Yeah.
marrying a Christian,
Yeah.
you know,
Hmm.
and yeah,
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that what may be good is to be able to talk to them starting from early on versus not having conversations, and then when they bring home a partner, then tell them, you know, marry a Christian.
Yeah. Yeah.
But early on, to be able to, again, just going back to the context of even when they start having relationships or interested in crushes, and that might be around even in middle school,
Yeah.
to help them to understand all of that in the context, again, of faith, love God, and love your neighbor,
Yeah.
the person that you're interested in or dating. And what would that mean? If you are called to love God in your faith and conviction, uh, uh, you may have a conviction to be yoked with a believer,
Yeah.
and not to then overlook that if in your heart that is God's conviction for you, because that's what Scripture talks about. And so if you have, what might that be about? Being able to, again, uh, open the line of discussions and communication, and being able to ourselves, in the context of having the conversation, love God, love our child in the midst of some things that are much more complex, especially living in this world where we cannot control all of the outcomes. We are called to continue, however, to simply love our teens,
Yeah.
love
Yeah.
our children as they grow up.
I think, though, Monica, tell me if you disagree, but I think, though, it's still important to make sure that we express our Christian faith and, help them understand that the scripture is clear that
Hmm.
we should not be yoked with unbelievers. What fellowship can light have with darkness? That, again, it's not about marrying a partner that makes a lot of money, has a good career. Not only those things,
Hmm.
but faith is an important part of
Hmm.
dating and marriage
Hmm.
too, as
Hmm.
Christians.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah.
And those are some of the things that, again, going back to talking about it early on in, while they're young,
Yeah.
especially when they're starting to take interest. And as you do, what we have also understood or experienced is that oftentimes when kids at that age, sometimes they won't even be able to decipher, is this a Christian or not non-Christian, even though you may share that, right,
Yeah.
conviction, and put it on the table with them. That's why the important kind of ability to be able to talk to them about it again, and say, because here's they may start to like somebody,
Yeah.
and they may start to get influenced by the peer culture, which is and this is not unusual for a lot of Asian American teens, that they will adopt a little bit more of the patterns of the Asian, of the um, kind of the dominant cultural practices,
Yeah.
uh, rather than the Christian practices.
Yeah.
Sometimes, that happens. And so if that happens, continuing to be able to ask them these important questions about the call of being yoked with a believer, and what does how can they have that in mind in the midst of their dating,
Yeah.
because at that age they're not really thinking about dating to get married.
Yeah.
They just like them,
Yeah.
right? They
Yeah.
just have a crush, and they want to have some time with this person that they really like. And so continuing to have those open conversations will be uh, helpful.
And I think you're highlighting kind of the last thing I wanted to talk about is when should you open up these conversations? You know, maybe your kids are older in senior high, maybe they're younger. I can hear you say advocating younger is better, but I just remember you being such a good mom, just always just even playfully when they were in middle school or even in high school, you might notice one of our sons flirting with somebody at church, a little older, and, just playfully saying, do you like that person? How do you feel? And being open,
Mhm.
creating an openness to just talk about
Yeah.
dating and issues
Mhm.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you that, uh, uh, being able to talk about relationships earlier on, especially when they're starting to build up those feelings of liking someone, because sometimes um, it's hard to understand what do I do. There's nothing wrong with liking and having a crush and being able to feeling certain desires
Yeah.
to be close to somebody. That is really that's not wrong to have. What they need guidance on is how to make sense of that too sometimes. And then what does that mean in light of then uh, later on having a date or having conversations.
Yeah.
Uh, Having said that, talking to kids about those topics, middle school, I think high school is generally that time when there's a lot more active dating, currently in our context and culture. And so um, it's good to get that line of communication started earlier on. And then as you continue that, there may be godly wisdom that you want to provide for them and talk about guidelines. Like, let's say, the guideline of not having a one on one because necessarily they might not feel ready to be able to understand the depth of maybe in emotional intimates, how to build emotional intimacy in a godly way. And so you might have, as a parent, a guideline of saying you can like each other, um, but we want you to like each other in the context of a group.
Hmm.
So go on group dates or public dates or set some clear boundaries around expectations on physical intimacy and the idea of how to do that, waiting for marriage. Those are all good conversations to have along the way.
Yeah, no, that's good. This is such a topic that can take us for hours to talk about,
Hmm.
but we want to respect our time on this podcast, and we'll definitely revisit uh, uh, this theme again sometime in the near future. But thank you for sharing, and I appreciate this time with you. Um, so, for our listeners, may we embrace the hope and joy of the gospel and believe that it's true, powerful, and transformative. Thanks for listening to Asian American Parenting. We hope that you have enjoyed this podcast. For more resources, visit the show notes. See you next time.